Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello and welcome to our Monday night Truth and Liberty broadcast. I tell you, I'm here with Richard Harris. He's normally here. He's our Chief Counsel for Truth and Liberty. And tonight we have a lady with us who actually survived an abortion. And anyway, I'll introduce her more in just a few moments, but it's not often you get to talk to a person who's been through an abortion. Yep. They talk about women's rights. What about all of the women that are being aborted? So anyway, this is a unique perspective, and I think it's going to really minister to you. And I've known our guest here a couple of times. She's been on my television program. Matter of fact, she's going to be on the 20th through the 24th of January on our programs. And I tell you, you will be truly, truly blessed. So we'll introduce her more in just a moment. But we want you to interact. This is a call-in program where you can participate. Also, it's a viewer-supported program. It does cost us some money to do this. And I'm sure Richard will give you all the details, but we're now a 501c4, which means that this is separate from Andrew Wommack Ministries. This is kind of a political arm of the ministry, and it is not a tax deduction, and we need people to support this so that we can continue to speak out on these issues. So this is Richard Harris. I'm going to let him give you all the details about how you can get involved.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's so great to have you guys watching tonight. I'm really looking forward to this live cast. I've never spoken to an abortion survivor, so I'm looking forward to this with great anticipation. I hope that all of you guys are watching our live cast tonight on our website at truthandliberty.net, and you can watch it also on our social media pages like Facebook and so on, but your experience will be better if you click over to our website where you can't be censored, so tune in there.
And let me just say that we're liable to say something tonight that would get censored. We've been censored a number of times. Anytime we say something that they consider politically incorrect. So
somehow mysteriously it drops.
Yes, check out truthandliberty.net.
Yeah, well, and on our website, speaking of our website, we have a resources page, a resources tab, and I'd like to encourage everybody to check that out. If you haven't, you should, because there is some really great information on there, including a 24/7 news feed. So we've selected our favorite conservative news organizations, and we've linked to them, and you can just do a one-stop shop going to truthandliberty.net to get your news on a 24/7 basis. We've got all kinds of other types of information on there too, with research and data. And the latest thing that we just put up today, Planned Parenthood released its annual report for 2018 and 19. And so we've got that actual report up there, and we're going to share some of the data from that tonight, probably, Andrew. And, I think we're winning this war, but the fight is not over yet. Andrew mentioned that we're donor supported, and we really appreciate your generosity. If you'd like to support us, you can go to our website, truthandliberty.net, and click on Donate and fill out the information there. And again, it's not tax deductible, but it is going for a good cause and to advance truth in our culture. So we really appreciate that. I wanted to share some information about events that are coming up here at Andrew Wommack Ministries, and not just here. One of the big ones coming up is the March for Life rally, which is going to be on January 24th in Washington, D.C., but we also have one in Denver in Colorado. So for all the Colorado folks who are listening, on January 11th in Denver at 1 o'clock, there's going to be a pro-life rally and march. So we hope you can turn out and support that event. And then, Andrew, you mentioned the programs that are going to be focusing on life that you taped with Melissa and with Kristen Hawkins, and those are going to be airing January 20th through 24th
it was
on Gospel Truth.
It was anointed. I mean,
bet.
Melissa and I both were sitting there fighting back tears so that we could keep the broadcast going.
Wow.
I mean, God is really going to touch people through this, and I think it's going to make an impact, so you need to be a part of it.
So that's the Gospel Truth is the name of the program, and you can find where that airs on our website at awmi.net.
And then also go to gospeltruth.tv and watch it there.
Oh yeah, excellent.
Our own internet television program.
Yeah, that's so many things here at the ministry. Andrew's also got a Gospel Truth Conference, another one coming up. This one's in Florida at the Hilton Orlando, and Greg Fritz is going to be with you sharing the Word of God, and I know that's going to be an awesome time in the Lord. February 7th to the 8th, again in Orlando, and you can register for that at awmi.net/events. And then the Men's Advance, one of my favorites around here, is coming up in March. I can't believe it's already getting that close. March 12th to the 14th here in Woodland Park. And there are going to be some amazing speakers and preachers at this deal, including James J.B. Brown, Tony Dungy, of course, Andrew, and many others. So you guys want to be sure to check that out. And every week on the livecast, we do a product giveaway, and you can be eligible to receive a free product, one of Andrew's tapes, DVD series, or books, or even sometimes we have other ministers' products available too, by subscribing. Become a subscriber to truthandliberty.net, and you'll be eligible to receive that. And I want to share that last week's winner was Angie Gossett. Angie won God's Kind of Love, a CD series by Andrew that is awesome. This week's product is the book called Grace, the Power of the Gospel by Andrew. It's not what you do, but what Jesus did. I tell you, grace is the power of the gospel. It is the core of the gospel, and so subscribe today and be eligible for that gift. And for your questions, if you have questions for Melissa tonight or Andrew, you can post those if you're watching on our website in the chat function, chat feature there in the comment section, or go on, if you're on Facebook, you can do it in the there in the comment section on Facebook. So we'll get to your questions hopefully toward the end of the broadcast. And if you need prayer tonight, you'd like someone to agree with you in prayer, you can call in for trained prayer ministers at 719-635-1111, or you can click prayer there on the website, and we'll have someone agree with you in prayer. So thank you guys again for watching, and it's going to be a great live cast.
Amen. And so our guest tonight is Melissa Ohden, and she actually survived a saline abortion. I think it was in I better not tell her age. She may not want me to tell. But anyway, it's been a while, and she is an advocate for pro-life. And I tell you, I've had her on my program twice, and I've just really grown to love Melissa. She's got a good heart. She's not condemning the people. As a matter of fact, I don't know how much of her personal testimony she'll share, but she actually reconciled with the people that performed this abortion and did these things, and it's a great testimony of redemption. And so, Melissa, we want to welcome you to our Truth and Liberty broadcast. Thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I think I'm going to borrow your line when I say it just happened a long time ago, right? It's been a while.
That's right. I don't mind telling my age, but not everybody feels that way. So I thought I'd give you the privilege of letting people know if you want to.
Yeah, thank you.
But we've got a lot of things to talk about, but I know that people, with the introduction I've given you, they're going to be asking, how do you survive an abortion? Could you tell us just a little bit about it? I know that you could talk for quite a while, but what happened?
Yeah, well, and it is a miracle. That is the short version of the story. But I'll age myself really quickly.
Okay.
I am 42, and it's interesting because that's kind of an important fact when we look at the history of abortion and survivors. The type of procedure I survived in 1977 isn't performed routinely anymore, the saline infusion abortion, quite simply because too many of us survived it. And so the abortion industry themselves admitted that years ago, that's why they stopped performing it. They needed to find much more effective ways of making sure children like me didn't exist in this world.
That's terrible.
So that type of procedure involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. And typically the procedure lasted about 72 hours. The child would soak in that toxic salt solution, being poisoned and scalded to death. And then they would induce labor with the intent of that deceased child being expelled from the womb. So the child would be burned, poisoned, and then delivered dead if it was done, of course, correctly in the manner that they wanted it to.
So the saline abortion actually burned you, didn't it?
It was meant to scald me to death. I was born alive, obviously, as people can start to figure out. We actually know through my medical records that I soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days. 2 days longer than what the standards of the procedure even were, but it was just quite simply because they kept inducing my birth mother's labor and I would not budge. I just wouldn't move from the womb. And so
you were stubborn from the very beginning. Huh?
Hey, you said it. You said it. I believe that is, is that a fruit of the Spirit? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not sure stubbornness is, but commitment, strength is a great commitment.
Faithfulness, yeah.
Awesome. So how did you survive? I mean, did you have any effect on you when you were born? Have we lost Melissa? Are you still there?
Sorry, it was showing me that the signal was getting slow on me.
Okay. So how did you survive this? Were there any effects that it had on you, physical effects?
When I was born alive, I weighed a little less than 3 pounds, which actually makes it clear to those doctors that I was much further along gestational age than what the abortionist had written on my medical record. So they think I was probably about 31 weeks gestational age, not the 18 to 20 weeks that the abortionist had written on my medical records.
Wow.
And I suffered from severe respiratory problems, seizures, jaundice. They thought I had a fatal heart defect initially because I was under so much distress. So they thought that I probably wouldn't live for very long, that I would be suffering from multiple disabilities throughout my lifetime if I did actually survive. There were some mistakes made in my medical care, so they even thought I would be blind from that. And I think we live in a culture that still hears that kind of description and somehow thinks maybe my life was not worth living, that my life was not worth saving, that maybe somehow no one would love me. But I have been loved from the very beginning of my life.
That's awesome. And I don't know if you want to go into any of this, but it was actually your grandmother that performed the abortion, and your mother was not told that you survived. And so, I mean, you were adopted, and how old were you when you actually found out what had gone on in your life?
Yeah, it's a pretty wild story, right? God and I have a lot of discussions about that. Like, this is wild. But I now know so many wild stories like mine. And I love that in the midst of how wild life stories can be, God is always in the middle of that mess, writing his message. And you're right, Andrew. My maternal grandmother was responsible for forcing the abortion upon my birth mother. My birth mother was only 19 at the time. They weren't happy about her being pregnant out of wedlock. And we can, surmise that they really didn't like my biological father, which is so sad, right? That was meant to lead to my death because of their feelings about me.
Let me just insert here that people sometimes will say in the case of rape or something like that, they will give an exception. But my thought is that child didn't do anything wrong. Why would you kill the child for what the parent did, whether it was incestual or rape or whether it was just not married and the person moved on? It's a terrible thing to do.
And it's such a subjective decision, right? That's what I try to talk to people about if they identify themselves as being quote unquote pro-choice or believing in exceptions. And I say, okay, so, what's the difference between you and I? Why is it that you get to have a birthday and I have to have the day that I was accidentally born alive?
Wow.
What's the difference between you and me? Why does it have to be different for me?
Wow. So, Melissa, you were adopted by a great family. I've heard your testimony, and I mean, you call your adoptive parents mom and dad because, I mean, that's your family and stuff. But you found out about this in kind of a bad way, and it affected you for a while. What happened as you began to come to grips with what your real mother had done?
Yeah, we can kind of laugh about it now, right? It's kind of awkward the way it came about. I grew up knowing I was adopted, that I was deeply, deeply loved. And my mom and dad will always be my mom and dad. They know that, even though I'm connected with my biological family. But I accidentally found out when I was 14 years old because my older sister, as a high school student, was facing her own unplanned pregnancy, was considering every option, which included abortion. And so when our parents found that out, they told her my survival story, hoping that she would make a decision that was different than what happened in my biological mother's life. And so that's ultimately how it came tumbling out. We were having an argument one night and she let it slip that there was more of the story of my life. And so, there I was at the age of 14, sat our mother down, was not expecting to hear that I survived an abortion. And, I'm pretty transparent with the world. This was not who I wanted to be all those years ago. I don't know that I've never met anybody who wanted to be the survivor of an abortion.
No. Dubious honor.
The other side will say that. They'll go, oh, these people just must have wanted to be famous.
What?
As a little baby, I'm not sure that you had much choice.
Right.
You're fighting for your life, but you certainly weren't in control of the situation.
Yeah. So it was painful. I did not want to be this person. I, sinned and struggled and tried to run away from the truth about what had happened in my life, tried to distance myself from all of that pain. And I always share that with the world because no matter what it is that somebody's gone through, I think everybody can relate to what it's like to go through something painful and not know how to deal with it appropriately and stumble on that journey. And so, I love that even when I was stumbling and fumbling in my suffering, God was there. I mean, I felt his spirit moving time and time again, reminding me that every single one of us is loved and worthy and has a purpose, and no one is a mistake. No one.
Well, obviously you have gotten over whatever hurt and bitterness or things that it caused in your life. Was this the Lord that made the difference, or how did you get over this?
It's the grace of God. When we talk about forgiveness, for me, forgiveness is the key to why I am who I am and why I can do the work that I do in this world. Because if I wouldn't have forgiven my biological parents and my grandmother and that abortionist, if I didn't love them as fellow human beings, I could be a really angry, bitter.
Absolutely.
And I'm not that. It is, but in the midst of that, Andrew, I do truly believe that is the grace of God that allows us to love and forgive other people in that manner.
I'm sure you've heard this, but people say that unforgiveness towards a person is like you drinking poison to hurt the other person. Unforgiveness hurts you. Yeah. Your life you would not be able to do what you were doing if you were full of anger and rage instead of love and compassion. So unforgiveness is a killer.
Absolutely. And I see it, I see it in fellow survivors. I see it in men and women sometimes who have had abortions. And I think, we all see that in those Hollywood actors and actresses or whoever it is that chooses to get involved in things, right? Sometimes what captures our attention is the statements that they make, but behind that, there is that bitterness or that unforgiving or their guilt, whatever it is, there's something behind that.
Well, Melissa, I know your story that you eventually were able to reconcile with your birth mother. And anyway, there's a great story here, but have you got anything written or a website that people could go to get the full story? I'm sure a lot of people are very interested right now.
My website is just my name. The last name is the hardest part. So it's Melissa Ohden, OHDEN.com. You can find out more about my story there. see videos. You can see the book that I wrote in 2017 called You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir. That's actually being re-released later this month with additional content written by my birth mother and myself, and including photos of us together for the first time. And there's also an audiobook that's coming out this month for the first time, too.
Oh, that's great. Hopefully our team here will get that up on the screen. I think they've got it now, so that's great. So anyway, we got a lot of things that we can talk about. But again, I want to remind people that you can go to our January the 20th through the 24th broadcast on Gospel Truth, and I'm going to be interviewing Melissa and also Kristen Hawkins. And they were a powerful weeks of program, and it's in celebration, or not celebration, but recognition of the Roe versus Wade anniversary. And Melissa, we want to talk about some things that are happening. First of all, let me just ask, what kind of platform has God given you? I see you and your name everywhere. God has opened up doors for you to just tell this to the world. What's happening?
Yeah, well, there's always something going on, right? For people to know a little bit about what God has done in my life, I have a master's degree in social work. You know, I've always had a heart of serving people and helping people. But I knew God was calling me forward to use my life for this manner. And so I gave up my career as a social worker about, oh my goodness, 10 years ago now. And so have been out speaking and helping places like pregnancy centers raise money because we know the abortion industry is well funded through our taxpayer dollars, and organizations like pregnancy centers that meet the needs of women like my birth mother are woefully underfunded. And so, you know, do fundraising and speaking and writing all over the place and, you know, lobby Congress and testify before Congress. But really my greatest passion is working with other survivors. So I grew up, you know, not knowing my story. And then when I found my story out, I felt very, very alone for a long time. And I love that in the midst of that, God has used that for good too, because now I run an organization called the Abortion Survivors Network. We've connected with over 300 other abortion survivors, and most of those have felt very alone throughout their lives too. And so you're going to see more stories, more faces, more names like mine, because I think, you know, part of it is learning that you're not the only one allows you to start to heal and find your voice and be supported. But I think the other thing that's really important to acknowledge is that, you know, last year's extreme abortion legislation really brought out something in survivors, whether you're public or private, where survivors are saying, you know, no, we're not going to allow you to keep targeting children like us. We're not going to allow you to take away protections legislatively that we should have and we deserve. So you're going to see more stories like mine because they're ready. They're ready.
Well, you know, I totally disagree, as I know you do, and Richard, and probably most of the people watching this, that a child is not alive and is a part of the mother's body and stuff like that. But putting all of that aside, once a child is born and is outside of the womb, the evil, what is in a person's heart that could take a baby like you, like your grandmother, when she realized you were alive, just set you aside and was waiting on you to die. And if it hadn't been for a nurse who happened to come along and have compassion on you, you would not have survived this. How evil is that? I can't even imagine.
I know. And it's the greatest evil that there is, in my opinion, right? I mean, I think, you know, especially this time of year, right, when we're just finishing Christmas celebrations, my mind always goes back to that, right? This is from the very beginning, a child was targeted. You know, there is no greater child than him. But we know biblically, you know, this is what set the stage. And it doesn't surprise me anymore. I hope that doesn't sound terrible when I say that, Andrew,
Well,
right?
no, you just dealt with it. I mean, you made a statement that there's over 300 abortion survivors that now have joined your network. I think most people would be shocked that there's that many, and there's probably many more.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the tip of the iceberg. I would say, statistically, we've seen numbers telling us that there are likely tens of thousands of survivors. Now,
That is unbelievable.
what we have to, of course, put that up against is the fact that we've had 1 billion abortions around the world, well over 1 billion. In the United States, we are over 66 million that we can count. I mean, again, we know that statistically that number is much higher. So, tens of thousands in the face of 1 billion lost is a drop in the bucket, but it's
And
more than
some of our viewers may not be aware of this, but now abortion worldwide is the #1 cause of death in the world. There are more children being aborted than there are dying from any type of disease, murder, tragedy, whatever.
42 million people killed by abortion in 2019. That's 7 times the Holocaust in World War II. Innocent lives murdered for no reason except parents' convenience. And it's impossible to get our heads around that, isn't it?
It is. So, Melissa, we try and give some positive information. What is your opinion on our battle against? I think that a lot of these states like New York, New Jersey and stuff that are passing these born alive things where they kill the child, it's because they see the handwriting on the wall. I think there are positive signs that we're winning this war.
Absolutely. I think we can look back on the last year and, even though there is this huge loss that we've all experienced because of this legislation, when we recognize why that came about, that needs to give people hope. Because the abortion industry and their lobby admitted that very early on in 2019, that they were fearful of, Kavanaugh being added to the Supreme Court. They were fearful of how many Supreme Court justices would be added after him by President Trump, and that they were deeply.
Oh, it froze on us again.
We've lost audio. Can I point something out while
we're
waiting? We have on our website a petition from a group called Moral Outcry where you can sign and actually lend your support to the urging the United States Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. And so it is an important time. And if you want to do something to make a difference, there's one little thing.
Are you back, Melissa?
I am sorry. I see how it must have cut out.
We lost you for just a second there. But, we were talking before the broadcast began that you'll have to give the details of the name, but there is a challenge to some of the abortion things that possibly could make it to the Supreme Court that could change everything. Right.
Well, there's a case pending there right now called June Medical Services versus GEE, G-E-E, and this case comes out of Louisiana. Louisiana had passed a law requiring doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals so that if the woman needs care or the baby born alive, that they can get them to the hospital and taken care of. Well, a very similar law was passed in Missouri a few years ago, and the United States Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional against Roe versus Wade. So the fact that the Supreme Court is taking this case instead of just letting the lower courts handle it, a lot of people are optimistic that this might mean the court is wanting to dial that back or even maybe so much as reverse Roe versus Wade. So a lot of people are putting a lot of resources into this. I saw that over 100 congressmen and congresswomen signed an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief, and filed it in that case a few weeks ago. So, and I know lots of other organizations are paying real close attention to it.
So, Melissa, let me ask you, if they did, let's say that the best case scenario, they did overturn Roe versus Wade, what does that mean? Is that the end of abortion, or tell us what this means?
I wish it meant the end of abortion. Yeah. What it would mean, of course, is, we would see that change at the federal level, and it would go back to what it looked like before Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton, which would then be a state-by-state decision. So, even though there is this political battle that we wage, this is when we also have to recognize and go back to the fact that we have to create a culture where life is respected. Mm-hmm. Yes, we want lives to be protected, legislatively. This shouldn't have ever been an issue. But we also have to create an environment where life is seen as worthwhile and valued and sacred from the moment of conception. And we have to support women and men in a time of crisis and, do something to help people who are being coerced and forced. there is so much work to be done.
So prior to Roe versus Wade, each state had their own legislative decide how they would handle abortion. Then when Roe versus Wade and the other one, I forget the name of that.
Doe versus Bolton, I think.
Yeah, Doe versus Bolton. When those were passed, the federal imposed their will upon the states. And that really could be considered unconstitutional, this whole thing, the way
Absolutely.
it was done, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if Roe versus Wade was overturned, it would be kicked back to the states. Does anybody know how many of the states were actually against all of this liberal abortion before the government forced it on them? Do you know that?
That's a good
Jeff,
question.
do you know that number?
I don't know that number. I think there was a spectrum like there kind of is today. Some states would allow abortion in cases of rape or incest or other things like that. A handful had an absolute ban on it, but not very many. And then there were some that allowed it, like Colorado. Actually, our really liberal law was passed before Roe versus Wade, and it allowed abortion up until birth.
So if this court case overturned Roe versus Wade, all it would do is kick it back to the states, and then we'd still be fighting this battle on a state-to-state basis. But the positive thing there are some states that are actually outlawing abortion from the time a heartbeat is found. And I mean, it would be a major, major win.
It'd be a major win. There is another option that no one talks about, which is the Supreme Court could find that an unborn child has a constitutional right to life. And if they did that, then that would impose on the states the opposite. That would impose the obligation on the states to protect that unborn child as a human being with a right to life. And that would be just absolutely awesome, but we'll have to wait and see.
Now, I've also heard that in the Roe versus Wade decision, they made some kind of a disclaimer that this is in the absence of any proof that the child is a human being. And if you could ever establish that, they would be protected by the Constitution the same as everything else. So
yeah,
if that ruling was to come out that this is a child, could that outlaw abortion?
It could. If they said that unborn children have a constitutional right to life because they are persons under the Constitution, then that would mean that states could not constitutionally deprive those children of life without due process of law. And they could come under the murder statutes and the manslaughter statutes and everything else like that. So now I don't know if they could go so far as to ban abortion by private individuals, but they could certainly lay the legal framework for states to do that.
You know, this is such a mess. And Melissa, I'd like your comment on this, but to me, this reminds me, I think you mentioned this when you did the television programs, but this is similar for our generation, the way that it was back during slavery. That most people recognized slavery was wrong, but it was so ingrained into the culture that they basically just accommodated it. But we have to stand up. I think it's a defining issue for our generation of believers. We've got to do something.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading through an article today and someone used a term, and I think I'm going to borrow it and maybe you guys will know too. But he talked about culturally appropriate victims.
Oh, wow.
And the fact that we live in a culture that somehow decides which victims are palatable, to some extent, right? Which victims are acknowledged. And this is something that I have really been pushing on over the years is abortion survivors are not, in this person's terms, we are not a culturally appropriate victim, right? We are underlooked, we are overlooked, we are ridiculed, we are told that we don't exist, that we need to just shut up, that we should just be grateful that we're alive. But at the same time, we're told that we didn't have any right to be born. It is rather absurd, to be perfectly honest. And so I truly believe that survivors are part of the answer when it comes to not only people seeing the humanity of the unborn child, but for us to challenge our nation politically to say, what about us? I have the right as a woman to have an abortion, but I simply didn't have the right to be born in the first place.
That's strange.
That doesn't make sense.
I don't remember when I first saw you, but if I remember correctly, have you spoken at the Colorado State Legislature? Did you ever speak there?
I don't believe that I have, actually. No, that is one place that
Well,
I
I
haven't
saw
been.
you speaking in front of some legislature. It may have been federal.
It probably.
But man, it was powerful. And people were getting up and walking out, and they got so upset that you lived. It was just unbelievable that people would actually have rather preferred that you die because you were coming against what they believed, and you just stood strong. So I guess you get this quite a bit, don't you, that people would prefer that you'd never survive the abortion?
Yeah, well, they can say that behind my back. Very few people will say that to my face. But, I think what irritates them, and we hear that from time to time, and I say we because it trickles down to my husband sometimes. People will say, gosh, I'm sorry that that happened to her, but does she really have to talk about it? I mean, can she just not go on with her life?
This is one of the reasons it's so important, Melissa, that you speak, because see, as long as there's not a face on this, and as long as they can convince themselves that this isn't a person and it's just a hunk of flesh and they don't see it and stuff, it's easier for them to just be willingly ignorant of. But you put a face on this that really aggravates people.
Well, and I can't even think, Andrew, of any other victim in our society that we would tell people, you need to just be quiet and just get over it, right? Or not try to do good with something horrible that happened to you. It's really a unique position for survivors to be in.
It is. Let me ask you this. I'm sure there's people watching this that possibly are pregnant, maybe even consider an abortion or have children or friends or something, and they're seeing you. How would you say, as an abortion survivor, what would you say to somebody that's actually considering this? How would you deal with that?
This is life-changing, and not just for that child in the womb. Abortion is life-changing for a woman who has the abortion, for the man who maybe is not supportive of her, so she goes ahead and has that abortion, or maybe he pays for it or takes her to the abortion clinic. Abortion affects those grandparents, whether they know about it at the time or they find out about it later. It affects siblings, aunts, and uncles. There is grief, sometimes unspoken grief, but grief that is carried throughout families. And lives are forever changed by abortion. It isn't just something that people walk away from. I can count on one hand how many times people have told me that they were able to walk away from an abortion and their life was better. And people deserve better than abortion. People deserve better than ending the life of another human being. They deserve to be emotionally supported and have their needs met, whatever it is that they're up against, whatever crisis, whatever difficulty. Abortion does not solve a problem.
The movie Unplanned with Abby Johnson, she made it very clear that she was told it's just a real simple procedure. You take this pill and it's over with. And man, she suffered greatly. And I don't think that Planned Parenthood and the pro-abortionists are making this clear. They're presenting it as if there is no physical consequences or emotional. And what you're saying is that it's a traumatic, life-changing event, even for the mother.
Yeah, and they get to walk away from it, right? I mean, we know, of course, through Abby's experience and other clinic workers that, yes, they are forever changed by working in the abortion industry too, if they allow themselves to open up to that and how it affects them. But the reality is that all of us are impacted by that and forever changed by that. And, I wish that someone from the abortion industry had to answer some of the emails that I have to. The women who contact me hoping that they're actually my birth mother, because then that would mean that their child is alive.
Oh my goodness.
The fathers who contact me and say, I would do anything to have made a different choice, to have supported my wife, my girlfriend at the time, right? The men who will hug me when I'm somewhere and whisper in my ear and say, I am so sorry for what I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, I was at a coffee shop last week here in town where we're located, and a man came up, an older white-headed guy, and just thanked me for truth and liberty, and then just out of nowhere started telling me how he and his wife had an abortion 40 years ago and how they are still to this day dealing with the guilt and regret of that decision.
You know, I have been very involved in the pregnancy centers in this area. We've actually seen one Planned Parenthood close down, praise God, and the others just about quit doing abortion. So anyway, but we have hundreds of women that our pregnancy centers support that are going through counseling because, I mean, it is devastating. And some of them decades later, this is a lie that it doesn't have any effect on you. And I could preach this from the Word. I'll refrain from doing that, but Romans 1:18 through 20 shows you that every person knows in their heart. God reveals Himself. And I'm sure, Melissa, that you could give probably maybe dozens or hundreds of testimonies of people that in their heart, even though they were told it's okay and it's just a hunk of flesh and that it's part of your body, in their heart they knew different, and it affects them long term. Like you said, a handful on one hand that can do it without any conscience whatsoever. So I think we've lost Abby momentarily. There you are. Okay.
Melissa,
You have a comment on that?
Oh no, it shorted out on me. So
I'm just saying that the emotional, the guilt and condemnation from Scripture, I can show you that God convicts every person, but I bet you that you could give by experience talking to people that every woman in her heart knows that this isn't just her body. She's got a living person on the inside of them.
Well, and I think that's why we see some of those, comments that we do. We were talking even before the show, right, about the Golden Globes and the actress Michelle Williams' statement. She didn't come out and say the A word of abortion, but she talked about a woman's right to choose and just said how thankful she was for that woman's right to choose, because that's what enabled her to get to where she is in the world today. And, even though it's so frustrating to see that and to hear that, right away, my heart just broke for her, because I thought, what a lie you're trying to sell yourself and the rest of the world, right?
You probably be kinder than this, but the way I would say that is legalized murder allowed her career to flourish, and that's just terrible. And it not only has the effect on the individual, but it coarsens our entire culture to think that you can just kill anything that's inconvenient for you. It has affected our entire culture. I believe that abortion is like one of the tips of the spear that Satan is using to just attack things and to destroy. And man, this is great. We appreciate what you're doing.
Amen.
It's awesome.
Amen.
All right, we need to take some questions. We've got viewers, I'm sure, that probably would like to ask you some questions. Are you good with that?
I'm good, as long as my internet wants to behave.
And if it's something that's you don't want to answer, we'll let Richard answer it.
Okay.
Well, we've got a lot of questions and some really good ones. And the first one right off the bat is from Ruthie on chat. And she asks this question: pro-choice women scream, "My body, my choice," and claim the baby can't feel anything while in the womb because it's not alive. Do you think those that are for abortion are unaware of the actual abortion procedures?
To some extent, yes. I would say historically, people didn't really know what abortion was, especially even before ultrasound, right? People didn't really know everything they do now about human development. But, I would say now, if people are uneducated on abortion procedures and the whole issue of life, I think sometimes it's because they choose to not be educated. Yeah. We have all the information at our fingertips, right? Social media is so powerful. So I think sometimes people want to deny that truth. And I still see it in even some of my own friends, right? People who would say that they emotionally support me. I catch them saying things on social media where I just want to say, what? Right? What? How do you make that fit with what you know about me? So, I think we see that disconnect more than anything, right? They know the truth, but they choose to disconnect it because it's safer to hold on to their views, or, maybe they're self-protecting out of a decision they've made or someone that they know. And so we have to break down that disconnect. We have to engage in conversations with people. It doesn't mean we go head to head arguing with people, but it means we do have a conversation, right? We educate, we share statistics, we can challenge people in a loving way, we can share truth with them, in the hopes that that continues to make a change in their life.
In 1 Peter chapter 3, it's talking about the end times and people saying that, he's delayed, he's coming, he's never coming back. And it says, this they willingly are ignorant of. And I believe that that's exactly what you're talking about, Melissa. There's people that don't want to know because that's not what they don't want to be confronted with the facts. That's the reason they don't want you talking, because it's easier to do away with this if they don't put a face on it.
Makes me think of Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth. Although his movie was rubbish, that idea is true here.
And all of our pregnancy centers here, we've got ultrasounds in there. And I forget the exact statistics, but I know it's over 80% of the women, once they see an ultrasound, they keep that baby because they can't deny. I mean, sometimes you'll see that little tiny baby in the womb sucking its thumb. And they move in response to being poked and things like this. And scripturally, in Luke chapter 2, John the Baptist heard Mary's voice and leapt for joy at 6 months into the pregnancy and was filled with the Holy Spirit. And I guarantee you the Holy Spirit didn't fill a hunk of flesh. It filled a person.
Amen.
Awesome.
Well, so here's another question, Melissa. This comes from James on chat. He says, what's some advice you can tell someone who is thinking about getting an abortion?
Oh, there's lots of advice. I mean, I think first of all, we need to talk to that person, find out what it is that they're going through. Typically it's some kind of crisis or lack of emotional support. Yes, we see in the news and the Hollywood elite and folks like that. Yes, there are people who have abortion because the child is quote unquote inconvenient. But more often than not, what I see is that people are going through some kind of crisis or difficulty, and they feel like, that child is going to make that situation worse, or they somehow think the child is, part of that problem. So we need to sit down and talk to someone and find out what it is that they're going through. We need to let them know that even if they're unsupported in their family or in that relationship, that there are people that will come alongside them. So pregnancy centers, other pro-life organizations, find a church, right? Be that person yourself. I mean, I can't remember what the research study was, but there was a research study where women came out and said, and I think the number was like 80% of women who had abortions said if one person would have said that they would help them, they wouldn't have had an abortion.
Wow.
I mean, that's huge, right?
That's
volumes to us about what people truly need. They need to know that someone does care about them, that someone is listening, that there are services and supports that exist in our communities. We live in a culture where abortion is seen as a solution and it's pushed down our throats, right? And so most people know where to go to have an abortion. What they don't know is where to go to get help if they want to make a different choice.
We have started 4 pregnancy centers around here, and we've got a front page article showing that we cut the abortion rate in El Paso County in half and in the state of Colorado by 1/3. And my point is that there are thousands of these pregnancy centers. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Melissa, it was either you or Kristen Hawkins on our programs that gave the ratio of Planned Parenthood versus pregnancy centers to show that they say that without us, women wouldn't have these services. There are so many other agencies that can deal with it. Planned Parenthood is not helping anybody except the abortion industry.
Yeah, and these pregnancy centers, they can provide all kinds of help to women in need, from material, clothing, cribs, counseling, parenting classes, all these, and not to mention the health.
And I've had some people that were in really bad situations, like you were talking about, Melissa, where they're they aren't supported. Maybe they're single, they're a teenager. How am I going to raise this child? But they could offer it up for abortion. And when you present that, they say, I would never abort my I mean, I would never
Adopt.
adopt my child, but they'll kill it.
That's amazing.
That is amazing to me that they look at adoption as being like somehow or another immoral, but abortion isn't. That's terrible.
Well, I think, honestly, from my experience, and I've heard that a lot too, what that reminds us of is that they realize that there is a connection. That if they would carry that child throughout the pregnancy and come face to face with that child, they would see their humanity. They would care about them. They would probably love them already, right? And they can't allow themselves to do that. And that's what abortion effectively does, right? It takes away that connection, that relationship, which is such an incredible shame.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not just for the child, but for the women and the men.
So do you have children, Melissa?
I do. 2 girls. My oldest is now 11. She's going to be at the March for Life with me. She hasn't been to the March for Life for probably like 7 years, but she is so excited, and she's bringing along a friend. And I love this, right? This is, to me, this is what it's about. This is how we raise our children. This is how we establish our families as being pro-life. And we pass along this message to our kids every chance we can get.
And if your grandmother had succeeded in aborting you, then those 2 girls wouldn't have existed. And who knows, I mean, we're just making ourselves God when you take away a life and take away all that potential. It's just wrong on so many different levels. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, imagine 60 million people and the generations that have been cut off because of them, and the kids and grandkids and on down the line. Well, here's another question, Melissa. This one is from Cowboy Tom on chat. He says, Melissa, are you seeing an awakening in young people compared to the older generations that have ignored this issue?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? I was just corresponding with the older generation today. I actually had a...
That's me.
Yeah. Who are you calling old, Cowboy? No.
Right? But it was funny because he actually said, he said, I wish that some of the young people today could recognize how long some of us have been in this battle. So I think we see this, right, that there is a group of individuals who have been engaged in this battle for a very long time. And then I think we see that there has been a generation where it was easy for them to turn a blind eye to some extent. But then we see, the internet and social media and all of these things that have changed our world. And what they've done is educate and equip the younger generation about life. And so that's why you see so many of them at the March for Life. I mean, there will be probably hundreds of thousands of young people. I always want their energy. And I do want their energy. You see them there, and they are so passionate and excited and unafraid. And it's just an incredible blessing to see them. And so, yeah, we see that younger generation because they know the truth. And when you know the truth, you know that you're called to do something with it.
I have seen stats. I don't have them in front of me, and I couldn't quote it, but it's showing that the younger generation is actually becoming more conservative. And on this issue of life, that there is a lot of young people recognizing pro-life. They're becoming pro-life. I think that they're beginning to see the facts. So
Amen.
It's encouraging.
Amen. So Melissa, here's another question if you're ready for it. Are you involved in any pro-life organizations? Now, I know there's a lot of them out there, and we partner with several of them here at Truth and Liberty. And which ones are you a part of?
Well, I'm in a kind of interesting position. So with my organization, I'm so heavily involved in it, but historically I was on the board of the Vitae Foundation, which is based out of Missouri, but nationwide has used media to spread the pro-life message and most recently connect women with pregnancy centers. So I was on the board of Vitae for many, many years. I do quite a bit of work with the Susan B. Anthony list politically because I truly see the importance of having pro-life leaders in office. So the Susan B. Anthony list I work with a lot. Gosh, the list could go on and on, but those are a couple of the major groups that people will probably see me with out in the public eye. But, whether it's Students for Life, the Thomas More Society, I connect with them on some projects. You guys are going to see us very soon doing some big projects that are going to make a big splash. And so I'm excited about what the future holds.
And you'll be speaking at the March for Life this January 24th. So that's awesome. And she speaks in front of Congress and just, I see you everywhere. I see your name a lot.
Yeah, well, the cool part for me, even though this is a time of mourning and this month in particular is very hard for me, and I can always feel it spiritually the minute that it hits, there is that part of me that knows what my fate was supposed to be, in man's terms. So it is a period of mourning for me. But for me, the cool part is with this March for Life, they have never had an abortion survivor on the stage at the March for Life before. And we are long overdue. And so, my hope is that the more we put survivors out there, the more our stories are heard, the more we will change our culture.
I really do believe it's a miracle that you're alive and you survived, because there's multiple reasons, but one of them is God wants to use you. I think you got a destiny.
Oh,
and
yeah. This
a
is
mandate.
not about
You're like the 3 Hebrew children or Daniel, in the
Amen.
lion's den. God preserved you for this day and time.
Amen. That's awesome. We are so glad that you're alive.
Amen.
We got another question. We got time for maybe one more.
We do, and this one, Melissa, you've talked about forgiveness and redemption, and maybe you can dive into that a little bit more with this question, which is, how does your biological family handle their choices that they made against you?
That is such an important question, and I'm glad somebody asked that. My experience is a little bit unique in the respect that we now know that my maternal grandmother and the rest of their family knew that I survived and had me placed for adoption without my birth mother knowing about it. And so my birth mother was simply told the abortion had been successful, and she didn't know if I had been a little boy or a little girl. She spent over 30 years of her life with incredible regret and guilt, believing that she had successfully had an abortion and that she hadn't done anything to save me. And, I always tell my birth mother and any other woman, no one should have to choose between their family and their child, their relationship and their child. Nobody should be forced to choose between, their career or their education and a child, right? But our world has pitted women against children, which is so wrong. And so it's been a long journey for my birth mother. She didn't know that I survived until about 9 years ago now. And then we started to communicate, and she had to work through all of those old feelings, right? And then accept that I love her. She was never loved unconditionally the way that I was. And so this was really new for her. And so we really spent about 3 years building that trust and love with one another before we met face to face for the first time. So my birth mother is one of my greatest supports. She loves that I share our story. If you asked her, she would tell you that I'm the first person who ever fought for her. Wow. Which is wild, right?
That's awesome.
God's all in there.
And have your girls embraced her as grandmother?
Oh, yeah. A little funny fact about the way God works. I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and we moved here about 7 years ago. And what we didn't know is that my birth mother lives here.
Wow.
So,
Melissa, I'm sorry, but we've only got 40 seconds left.
That's a good place to land, isn't it?
We have CTN carrying this on their deal, and so we have to end at an exact time. But again, let me just say thank you so much. And people can go to your website. It's melissaohden.com. Is that right? And they can go there and they can get more information. And I encourage everyone to please take advantage of that. And please speak out on this and vote. 2020 is a critical year, and we could see the overturn of Roe versus Wade, which will be a big step forward in our fight against this. Amen. Thanks, Melissa. Thank you for being with us. Thank all of you for being with us, and God bless you. We'll see you again next Monday night.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net or by calling our phone center at 719-635-1111. Our prayer ministers are there to help you with your donations and to pray with you.